Good morning or good evening, and welcome to the second art education session. We had a conversation on this earlier this month at the Democratic Education Conference, and based on some inputs of that, I took this opportunity to come on to the Zasha event as well. So, of course, most of you here know me, but maybe just for the benefit of those who don't. So my name is Sifan Zawahir, and I'm not an art educator, and I'm not even an artist, although because of my dreadlocks, sometimes people do assume I am one. And it also sort of depends on what we define as to be an artist, which is something I'll come back to in a bit. And where this question about art education came up is because I'm in the process of setting up schools for self-directed education. And one of the sort of questions that came up in that is, so what is the role of art and art education in this school? And what is our role? What do we need to do? What do we need to offer? Things like that. And in getting into that, first I should make a small confession that I was, and maybe even still am, a nerd who used to think that art and art education was a waste of time. Like, what's the point in doing this silly, frivolous things? How can we solve the problems in the world with the art stuff? We should be doing, science and engineering and technology and all those sort of things. So I was sort of into STEM before STEM became a buzzword, maybe. But I've maybe had some kind of a epiphany from living with an artist. And I don't know if you can see some things on the wall, painting sort of things on the wall. So that's some work by this artist who is now 5.5 years old. And I maybe should also say that it's not really about this particular artist, because I think every child is an artist. I mean, unless you have some very, very severe learning disabilities, I think every child is an artist. So again, this depends on how we define artist, which I'll again come back to in a bit. So one of the sort of questions in my mind on this is, what is art? Right? Oh, sorry, one thing I should sort of mention. So I will share some sort of thoughts and inspirations from my side, and then afterwards, so I mean, the purpose of the sharing is to sort of set a platform for a conversation and to kind of stimulate the things, but it's not going to be like a 1 hour lecture from me or something like that. It's going to be maybe about 20 minutes of me sharing, and then we'll have open conversation based on the interests of at least of the different people here, some of whom are artists, or maybe all of them are artists, depending on how we define it. So in that sense of setting the base, one of the questions that I've been sort of exploring is, what is art, right? And it's actually a bit of a confusing term, right? Because we have works of art in art museums which are made by artists, right? But then we also have artisans and artists who are different kind of things. Like the artisans and artists are three different things, although they are all coming from the same root word of art. And then we have things like martial arts, and then sometimes we may say that leadership is an art, selling is an art, even flirting is an art. And I think there we try to maybe distinguish that it's not an exact science, it's not a precise thing, and that's why we say there's an art to it. And then we have arts degrees, right? And it's interesting, if you search for Faculty of Arts at University of Kelaniya, Sri Jawadanapura, Colombo, and Peradeniya. So Google lets you search for those things, but in Peradeniya and Colombo, it's still called the Faculty of Arts. But in Kelaniya and Sri Jawadanapura, it's called the Faculty of Humanities, or Humanities and Social Sciences. So are these arts degrees actually having art in them? So in we also have, I think, in a visual and performing arts faculty, but some of these arts or humanities faculties have arts like music or performing arts sort of thing, but they have also a lot of things that are more maybe the liberal arts kind of thing. So they have, like, philosophy and politics and history and things like that, which I don't know. I would maybe feel more comfortable calling them humanities. In the original Greek sense, they were liberal arts because they were the arts, as in skills, worthy of free men as opposed to slaves. So that's why liberal. And exactly what it constituted has changed over time, but there was a time it included geometry and astronomy, which we now not even consider humanities. We call them sciences. So what art means has been sort of changing over time. And then in our school system, we have aesthetic subject, which was like either drawing or music or I think Eastern music, Western music, or dance. But then for A levels, we had this art stream, which was then again like logic and economics and civilization and history and things like that. And I don't think there really was much art that happened in the arts education streams. There's sort of a confusion in that language as well. So there's confusion around what the term means. It's meant different things at different times. So if we are promoting art and art education, what exactly are we promoting? So one way I thought to try to tackle this is to just think a little bit about what do we as people spend on? What do we spend our money, our time, our attention on? Right? So at one level, there's very basic functional needs. So we need food, we need clothes, we need medicine, and then there are functional needs sort of beyond that as well. But then we also spend on things that convey a sense of beauty or talk to our senses, create sensory pleasures. And I don't know if signaling is part of that or something separate. I'll explain signaling in a moment. And we seem to do this when societies and individuals are able to spend on this. Although sometimes we maybe spend on them also when we are not really able to spend on them. But there is this sort of thing. I mean, even if you look at it from a Maslow's hierarchy kind of thing, that beyond the basic needs, there are things that we want to spend on, and we're not happy to just eat rice and dal and egg every day. We want variety. We want tastier food. We want food that looks better. So there's some aspect of this sensory pleasure in this. So just had some examples. So this is a very typical Soviet style apartment complex, and I lived on the 14th floor of this building for a year in 2003, 2004. As I mean, it probably looks a bit better now. They maybe done it up a bit, but even as far as Soviet architecture went in Estonia, this wasn't kind of the worst of it. There was other parts of the country where they look much more ugly. And you know, well, this was all we as students could afford, so we lived in this. But if you could afford to live in a nicer house, you do that, right? You people do spend on living in a beautiful home. And even though this sort of apartment complex was what we could afford to be in, when we moved in, we wallpapered the place. So that was what we were able to spend on in terms of beautifying, but we sort of didn't stick with this old dirty wallpaper that was there. We tried to make it beautiful. So why are we spending on these sort of things? It doesn't make the house any warmer or anything like that. It doesn't make it safer. It doesn't make it warmer. It's just beauty, right? So why were we spending on this? Um, and if it was just a functional aspect of travel, then you just need to get from A to B safely and maybe with some degree of comfort. But if you look at like business class, it's really gone way beyond just the comfort side of it. I mean, look at how the food is presented, right? I mean, this sort of fine dining experience is there as an indulgence. And I've even had like something like a tea candle, well, LED one for safety, and that's also places. So this is just purely to excite the senses and make people feel good, right? And to justify charging a premium. So I mean, you can rest better with a lie flat bed and things like that, but there's quite a lot of things here that are going for that sensory pleasures. Um, and then, I mean, unless it's a really crappy watch, a basic watch tells the time as well as the Rolex does, right? I mean, you could say it's an atomic watch or some random thing, and it has it's water resistant to so many meters or certain functional benefits, but definitely to have jewels in the positions and things like that. This is a luxury good, and it's certainly not to be able to tell the time better. And this is maybe one of the cases where the signaling benefit is more even than the aesthetic benefit, because you want to signal that I'm somebody who can afford a Rolex watch. And I thought this was also an interesting, because if it's really about the sensory pleasures, then cigarettes are also works of art, right? Because I mean, despite having like 80% warnings on this and probably no functional benefit, I mean, if at all, it has a negative impact on your health, and you have all these warnings, but still people continue to smoke. Right? So there has to be something about this sensory pleasure. And then cigarette makers also play with this, like they talk about the different flavors, they put these capsules to add flavors into it. There's a sort of brand perception. So in Sri Lanka, the gold leaf is the working class, the middle class cigarette. The Bristol or the Viceroy is the working class thing, and then people at that level aspire to the gold leaf. And then Dunhill is the upper class cigarette, and so there's a sort of class signaling effect in the cigarette as well. So with these things, one way of looking at it could be that art is for sensory pleasures, because feeling is a very fundamental human experience, right? I mean, so this, I could just wear some t-shirt, right? But then this particular t-shirt is because it had some kind of art on it. And I think we all have clothes that we like and make us look good and things like that. So there's some feeling that we get from wearing this, whereas if it was just a comfort, then whether it was um, it would be enough if it was just cotton, right? Um, so is art about creating products or experiences to make people feel? And of course, this isn't only just feeling good, because I think there's also, like, gambling is about feeling excited, horror is about feeling scared, satire and some forms of revolutionary art about making people uncomfortable and provoking them to action. So all of these things could also be art. Um, and in that sense, it could be amateur, where we are not doing it because we're trying to make money out of it, or it could be professional, where we are making money out of it, maybe when it's a main source of income. Um, so that's sort of one way of looking at it. And then there's some questions about that I'm a bit unclear on, like if this is about sensory pleasures, then where does it become hedonism? Where does it become addiction? In a Sri Lankan context, which because of the Buddhist influence in the culture, what does this mean about craving? Like, should we pander to craving, or should we try to escape from craving? Some questions there. And then related to this, there's a question of how good does art need to be, right? So if you want to make others feel, and especially if you want to make a living out of it, you have to achieve a certain standard, because otherwise it doesn't incite that feeling, sufficient feeling in anybody for them to bother with your art. And um, I think part of the reason why I felt I'm not an artist in school is because I couldn't achieve the standards that were expected from the art or aesthetic education we received. So I couldn't draw photography. So I felt that I was a failure at it, and therefore I am not an artist. But there's sort of another angle. So if you're making art to make somebody else feel something, then there's an instrumental purpose. You're trying to achieve something. So if I'm a filmmaker trying to make people think in a particular way or feel a particular way, then I'm trying to achieve that goal. And how successful I am would depend on how well I achieve that goal. So there's some instrumental aspect to it. But autotelic is where we do something for its own sake, right? And art for self-expression. So it's more about how it makes the artist feel, and the audience is sort of secondary. So when there's this quote about sing like no one is listening and dance like no one is watching, there is no audience here. This is art as expressing your emotions, as making the artist feel good. And I think it's in this sense that every child is an artist, because this picture that I'd used for the event cover page was so very experimental medium. He had chalk that was for use on the blackboard that he had, and he mixed the different colored chalk with water, put it on his palm, and made the palm print. So um, palm prints using paint is, he would have known it from preschool and things like that, but doing it with chalk powder was something he imagined, and he did it. And even all the things that he has on his room wall is that. And If it's from that sort of angle, then when I was in school, I used to enjoy origami very much as well. I mean, there was a sense of trying to achieve tougher and tougher uh, pieces, and that, so I was trying to do it at the highest skill level. So if in the sort of positive psychology concept of flow, then I was achieving flow through this sort of origami practice. So from a autotelic perspective, I think actually everybody is possibly artist. Um, and this for this something that's maybe what is happening in this autotelic sense. Why are we getting some kind of pleasure from doing it? And I think part of it is that um, it's art for imagination, because so just like feeling is a very fundamental thing, I think imagination is also a very fundamental human ability. And not just that we can do it, but that if we didn't do it, we may not be quite human. So I want to share a small video clip, but I think I need to just change the sharing mode. So just a moment on that. Right. So then there's a sort of question is whether consuming and creating art is how we use and enhance our imagination. Let me get to this video. So this is from a Terry Pratchett story, and Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite artists. It's from the book called Hogfather, where Hogfather is sort of like Santa Claus, and some people have been trying to destroy Santa Claus. And on the left is a character called Death, and on the right, the girl is Susan, who is the granddaughter of Death. And Death has been telling Susan that we need to save the Hogfather, because if we don't save the Hogfather, the sun will not rise tomorrow. And this is at the point where they managed to save the Hogfather, and Susan has some questions about it.
Now, tell me...
What would have happened if you hadn't saved him?
Yes.
The sun would not have risen.
Then what would have happened?
A mere ball of flaming gas would have illuminated the world.
All right, I'm not stupid. You're saying that humans need fantasies to make life bearable?
No. Humans need fantasy to be human. To be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape.
With tooth fairies, hogfathers.
Yes. As practice, you have to start out learning to believe the little lies.
So we can believe the big ones?
Yes. Justice, mercy, duty, that sort of thing.
They're not the same at all.
You think so? Then take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder and sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet, you try to act as if there is some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe by which it may be judged.
But people have got to believe that. What's the point?
You need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become?
So there is a sort of very big philosophical point there, like in all of Terry Pratchett's books, I think. So just a little bit more before I finish my part. So art is about imagination, but does imagination require art? And I think not, because I think any scientific invention was inspired by imagination. I mean, flight is something that has captured our imagination for centuries, and eventually it's something that we realize. And going to the moon, and now we are thinking of going to Mars. And cures for diseases. All of these things exist in our imagination first before they become real. So I think imagination doesn't require art, but maybe art makes it easier. So just some small points about art in education before we open up. So this is actually from a report published in 1943 in Sri Lanka, and it has some interesting things that sort of tie in all these things together. So um, they recognized back then about how art is a medium for self-expression, and that originality which contributes to the mental development, and that so they talk about the importance of creativity for the country, because you need to sort of innovate and solve problems, but they see a value in art for self-expression itself. And this say that art and music are good for this, because you produce something which seems to the child to be good, and not the answer at the back of the book which other people have already provided, which is what happens in science and history and things. I mean, it doesn't have to happen that way, but it does happen like that. And unfortunately, I think in Sri Lanka, art education has not heeded this, and that's why we have all sorts of examinations, even though they warn here not to have examinations unless somebody wants to become a specialist and needs to be taught technique. And they do also recognize that creativity can come from history, geography, mathematics, and things, but uh, do not, as a rule, produce it except in the highest ranks of learning. So uh, this when this repetition comes in, where you're playing a piece of music 1,000 times to pass an examination, that it's not self-expression but a means of killing the desire for it. And I think I was one of the many victims of this. So I think schools generally do a very bad job of education in science and maths and things, but I think they do an even worse job when it comes to art. So sort of concluding thoughts from my side, how I think art in education could be is that there shouldn't be any exams or assessments unless the child requests it. So especially if they're trying to pursue a certain degree of mastery and they want an assessment, they can have it. But if they don't want it, then it shouldn't be part of their education. And um, people who enjoy consuming art should be the ones who invite children to join them. So whether it's going to the theater or a concert, or whether it's sharing a favorite book or movie. So like I would be a very passionate advocate for Terry Pratchett books or Ben Elton books, and then somebody else would advocate for some other books. So we should only do that for things that we enjoy. And when there's a diverse range of adults who do that, then children will figure out within that what are the things that they enjoy and pursue those more than the ones that they don't. But it's not only about consuming it, it's also about creating arts. And then again, I think it should be people who enjoy creating that art. So now somebody who enjoys dancing should invite children to see how that works. How do they practice? How do they choreograph things? Somebody enjoys pottery could take them to their workshop. Somebody enjoys creating films. So people who don't enjoy creating a particular art form, I think, shouldn't be involved in art education. Um, and I think a key part is to if the adults are doing that, if the adults are sharing what they're passionate about, then within that, children will find what they're interested in, and then as adults we could just follow their interests, and whatever material or equipment or space or time they need, we can try as much as practical to provide it. And in that sense, even the school or classroom is a canvas. If you want to paint your walls, if you want to put something on it, if you want to decorate it in some way, then that is also a form of aesthetic expression for them. Um, so I'm sorry if I was rambling around a little bit, because I'm also still trying to figure out my thoughts on this, but I hope I managed to set enough of a foundation for to have a conversation around this. So since we are a small group, I think we don't need to sort of go into formalities of raising hands and things like that. We can, anybody who wishes to speak can unmute and speak.
Yeah, I'll share. So I had the opportunity to, I guess, learn art as an adult. 3 years ago. And what I did was I studied with a master and focused on key concepts and built skill over time. So by being very granular and focused on this is one component that would make something beautiful or make something attractive or something interesting. And over time, over about a year of consistent practice, I actually developed the skill to make a pretty picture. And that was what I was going for. And I actually get chills because I love the pretty pictures I make. And other people love looking at them too. And it's something that is now a part of me that I bring forward. And it's interesting because I think what was fascinating about your point is you mentioned about instrumental, where it's done for others, and then I forget the word, but done for yourself. And I think
autotelic, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That sorry. And it's what's fascinating to me to play with is this idea that oftentimes when we're good at something, we enjoy it more. And so by my working on the instrumental, I actually enjoyed it more. And then the more I enjoy it, the more other people get out of it. And so I that's just like, I just want to create art every day of my life. So I thought I would bring that to the table here.
I think Danny also had a similar experience with art, but I think not working with somebody, but more like tutorials on YouTube and things like that. And he's been sharing some stuff. Danny, are you there?
Yes. So yes. So one thing is, yes, I have never been an artist in my point of view because I never even touched a brush or even a pencil. But then, I mean, continuing from what we discussed, I just want to know, like, so you said that if it's instrumental, so like the way it is taught in school, and you have to please others by what you do, that it also can create some kind of an aversion, if I put it right. But I feel if you are a good appreciator, if you appreciate, say for example, that if you keep going to museums and if you feel that they have done a great work, will that support or destroy the artist in you? Because self-satisfaction is one important thing. If you aspire more, will it work the reverse, for example? So,
Well, I think if we are doing something because we enjoy it, that enjoyment comes when our practice is at the sort of edge of our mastery. So if we are, so let's say one of the games or sports I like to play is table tennis, right? And it's not fun for me to play it with somebody who is very much inferior to me because then the game doesn't sort of get anywhere. It's also not fun when somebody is very much better than me because then it's like 21-0 and like, you know, what's the excitement in that? But if it's somebody who is around my skill level, then it's very challenging and enjoyable. And I think that plays out even when it comes to art, where we sort of self-calibrate. So like now say you when you play music, then I think you would try to play harder and harder pieces because it's sort of boring to play at the, you know, twinkle twinkle little star sort of things, right? So you'd go as much as you can go, and you'd push yourself to improve your competence even if you weren't performing, but especially if you were performing for others, you would push yourself to keep going. And I think being able to see what others have done is a way of benchmarking, that is a way of getting inspiration. So I think it's useful, but I think it's about what story you tell yourself in that, like, you know, I'm still a beginner, I'm still learning, I'm making this way up, and I'm improving and I feel good about it, versus when we're in a class and the student next to me has got 90 for it and I've got 25 for it, and I feel like, you know, I'm such a loser, why am I even trying to do this? And especially when you add the competitiveness of, like, getting good grades at the O levels and things. So I struggled with drawing, and I tried dancing for a while. I just couldn't do it at all. Luckily was able to do English literature. Ours was the first year where it was offered. uh, I never enjoyed that English literature, even though for like all my life had enjoyed reading English books. But when you now have to read it and double guess what the author was thinking or intending when the red door was read or something like that, it sucked all the enjoyment out of it. But at least I managed to scrape by with a credit pass for that. So I think it's that sort of a grading, and especially that comparative grading when and especially also when I've not asked for it, when that's thrust upon you, that it becomes a problem. And I think if you take your painting and Will's painting as adults, it's not thrust upon you. It's something that you chose to do because it felt good for you, right? And if it stopped, when it stops feeling good, you would stop doing it, or you would find something else that felt good. um, and when it's a compulsory subject and you have to do it, I think that is where that killing can happen.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about, because I mean, so for example, the same example that you said. So if I listen to a good pianist playing a piece over and over again, something that I want to play, I mean, I will never get to that point at some this thing, right? So that can actually put me on the other negative side, but I never stop playing. But that can say always, okay, and then I used to say think like this. Okay, so if I could play as good as him, then I would be like him. So, like for example, if I'm so enjoying Beethoven's music, right, the composition, and if I'm trying to be a composer, if I cannot compose like what he has done, then I tend to think, okay, now if I could compose like Beethoven, then I would have been Beethoven in that position, right? But don't you think, compared to about 20 or 30 years back, when we used to listen to people sing and all that, before all this digital era came in, where we can access all kinds of music or art or whatever online, right, which is freely available, we were not so much comparing to the original tracks, the music that is performed in schools or whatever. We used to like have a lower benchmark, I would say. Now, but having listening to the originals and very high standard performance over and over again. Now, for example, say ABBA song, right? So if someone is performing an ABBA song, we always compare with the original track, and we try to find mistakes in them rather than appreciating most. So where they have gone wrong, why they have not done that small bit, So that is the thing that I feel like in the modern era, it's a bit different because we have access to originals very um, easily, right? So does it make any effect? That's what I'm saying.
Did that come about because of the access to the great access to the originals, or is it because it, society sort of become very divisive and trying to score points and things like that and put other people down? Because I think we can see that happening in other domains other than arts as well.
Yeah, everywhere. Yes, but I think it's because of access to originals. Because those days, I don't think we had cassettes and vinyls, which was not easily accessible like this one. Because this is just in a point of iTunes or whatever, you can get it. That's what I thought.
Mhm. I don't know if others, Samit, Rajit, welcome, Christy also. If you would like to comment on that or on any other side of it.
Okay, I don't know where this conversation is going. Okay, it went from whatever you said, education point of view, to a philosophical point of view, to like discussing like themes of public schooling. So I really don't know where it's going, and I'm just like sitting here. I'm like, what are we actually talking about? Because based on my research, um, I'm a researcher. I know that you, Sifan, and your wife, Dilipa, I know you guys from Arrow, and I'm from IDAC, and you guys are looking into opening a self-directed learning school in Colombo, Sri Lanka, right? And based on your slides, you're talking about art as an education, right? And from there, I was just listening to everything. And then, of course, that's where when you guys start talking about philosophy, I'm like, where is this going? Because where in Malaysia, our self-directed learning school, we don't do this kind of evaluation of grading art because we have an in-house artist ourselves and they don't grade it. In fact, they have rubrics, and rubrics would be pretty simple, like can they draw a straight line? What are their knowledge on different art mediums, for example, acrylic, oil, or crayons, whether can they use that, and the manipulation of those, like for example, if they use those like little chalk thingies where they like smear and then you can like smear even more. So that is what we evaluate, whether can they actually know the medium, how do they manipulate it and how they use it, rather than actually grading the art whether it's good or bad. Because when you say it's in the aspect of grading, like how you say in schools, when the teacher tells you, okay, you know what, you get an A because it's aesthetically pleasing, but else this person gets a B because it's not pretty. Because at the end of the day, art is still in the eye of the beholder, just like beauty is, right? So that's why I'm kind of like wondering, where is this going?
I would like to challenge you, if you would allow me to.
Okay.
Beauty is something that most people would appreciate. And it's something that's actually very difficult to produce consistently. With those two things in mind, I don't know. that was just something that it came up for me of, I guess, with which mentioned about arts in the eye of the beholder, humans thinking it's very beautiful and beauty being difficult to reproduce. I don't know, is that something that is to be celebrated, or it's for each person to decide?
I mean, if you're challenging me in the context of children, I feel like it's something that should be celebrated, right? I mean, you can't go, if let's just say the child made something and you feel like it's not nice to you, you can't be like, that's not very nice. If you wouldn't want to break their spirit. So obviously, children have their own, competency, especially with their fine motor skills. Younger children might not be able to draw a straight line, whereas, older ones might be able to draw a straight line. So at the end of the day, whatever, art that they produce, it's still beautiful and we should celebrate it because it's from their own effort. We don't know what's in their mind. Just like how, art therapy, there's a meaning behind things that they draw and whatever they project out. So of course, if, we can't really tell the child like, it's not really nice. So you have to be like, that's beautiful. Like just like how modern art, the painting where it's just like one blank white slate. I mean, sometimes it does look, like, what is it? It's just a white thing. But some people find it appealing. And of course, maybe to some people, they might find it appealing. And to some people, they might be like me, like, what is it? Same goes with the children. They might find it like, I drew this house and it's beautiful, I like it. And when they come to adult validation, obviously, the first thing we do is it's beautiful. But of course, if you put it in the artist's point of view, obviously the artist will see in a different view. Like, okay, what kind of mediums did he manipulate? Okay, he used crayons and he even used watercolor, those kind of things. And that's how, we see it. So that's, a penny for my thought.
Nice, thank you.
Okay, so just to try to answer that question on like sort of where this conversation is going. So some of the comparisons I was making of evaluations and grading and things like that was more to do with my experience in conventional school and what I understand to still happen in arts education in a conventional sense. Although of course there could be a lot of variability in that. So at one level, my interest in this is to shape what happens in the name of art education in the schools we're building, and that's something that I would try to like take from it. But I think in answering that sort of question, it's necessary to open up into sort of different dimensions, and the sort of philosophy of it, I think, is something that you can't really separate from that. I mean, even even what Krista said afterwards, like about how you would appreciate this art because you don't want to make the student feel bad. So then that's also part of the philosophy of education. And I would actually, if if somebody had made something that didn't turn me on, would maybe feel better to be able to say that, right? You know, let's say if somebody is, cooking something, right? And I think food is actually one of the most accessible forms of creative expression we have, because I mean, we anyway make food to eat, so why not be creative about it, you know, how it tastes and how it looks. So if somebody makes something, you know, if you visit somebody else and they make something and you don't quite like the taste of it, you will, politeness may dictate that you don't say that and you pretend that it's all good. But if it's something happening in your household, maybe it's actually better to say that, you know, I didn't like the chicken when it was made this way, but I did like it the other day or something like that, because otherwise, if you don't have that feedback, you're going to end up eating the not tasty food all the time. So I think that sort of depends on the relationship you have with the person. And I think while at a certain level you don't want somebody to sort of give up on the artistic endeavors because you didn't like it, at some point you could have a relationship with the person where you could say, like, you know, I can see how you've done this differently to last time. It isn't something that I enjoy, but if other people enjoy it, and most importantly, if you enjoyed creating it, then it's still valuable, right? I think another aspect also is that the examples Christy was bringing out were more in terms of like drawing and painting and that sort of art, but there is also so many other forms, like, you know, how you put some flowers together as an ornament to make a space beautiful, how you plate your meal so that it looks appealing, how you sing, how you dance, graffiti is a sort of form art. So there's so many ways of artistic expressions. And then so maybe this is also a philosophical question, but then are we nurturing all of those things, or should we provide opportunities for all of those things, or is some forms of art more valuable than other forms?
Honestly, my answer is just hands down, you provide the opportunity. Because, you know, you never know. What if, you know, okay, basically, when you have a school, you kind of want to use the environment as a teacher as well, right? So you have to provide the opportunities, because if the child doesn't explore, how would they know? Or like, let's just say it's not about a child, an adult. If they don't explore, how would they know if they are good at it? So for me, it's about the opportunities. If at least if they have explored it and they personally decided that, you know, maybe this is not for me, then it's all right. Because who are we to tell that, you know what, whatever you're doing is not nice. But if they had the opportunity to actually evaluate themselves within themselves, then it will be a lesson that's more meaningful rather than hearing it from someone else, right? I'm not sure if that's philosophical, but you know, it's just top of my head.
I think it is philosophical, and I think it's fits in with the conversation. Samit, anything you'd like to say? Samit is so he draws, he designs clothes. Your thoughts, Samit?
Okay, Sif, can you hear me? Okay. There are three things I mention right up here once you guys talk. First, I would like to talk about that the aesthetic and the concept. Once you come up with the art, the aesthetic is the people who think the margin, but actually the aesthetic purpose is not only the thing we can make a margin. The concept is the most important thing. I will like to combine it with the says about the t-shirt thing. Once you come up with that Catherine Hamnett's slogan t-shirts. So the Catherine Hamlet slogan t-shirts are mentioned more about the no war, no racism kind of thing. But the t-shirt is just only white on black or black on white. There are nothing else. So, but it gives a big conceptual message to the society from that art. It's a vast as well as it's a kind of a changing the fashion industry at that time from the Catherine Hamnett's slogan t-shirts. So if we think the aesthetic is the more major to mention a margin, okay, this art is nice and this art is not nice, kind of that. If you see what is behind in the Siffan's wall, uh, if somebody think this is and if somebody says this is not nice, uh, because he is talking about the only thinking about the aesthetic purpose, but what is inside that kid's thought, how he come up to that wall, how why he used those colors, why he used those paintings one on each other, why he draw that line. I think that is the most important thing. If we mention a people you can't draw, there are two types of people. Some are genetically they are artists, they have their genetical aspect and they come up with the drawing skills. I don't know how it, but there. But some are the practice and they become an artist. So when once I have to I don't want to mention the names, there are some Sri Lankan art institutes. The teacher is teaching the same method what he practiced to his kids, his pupils, and each and every pupil who draw the same arts like his teacher. Then once we see the painting, we can say, oh, this is a student from come from this institute. I think that's not has to be happen. Art is a very free mind. Each and everybody have to draw anything on a white paper. I mean, a blank paper. It has to be an art, and everybody have a concept, or everybody have some kind of an mental ideas to come up with an what he drew. He have a story, each and every line what he draw on that blank paper. So I think we can't put in a margin and make okay. Why people say this art is good? Why people say this art is not good? So the best thing is once we teach the kids, we need to say draw whatever you want and come up with a small story why you draw that. I think then it's easy to uh, give a good conceptual ideas or thinking as an imagination concepts for the kids. That's what I was taught.
I think this, what Samit is saying, connects very much, I think, to this instrumental and autotele, because if the art is for somebody else, and somebody's coming to buy a painting or something like that, then they don't see the process behind it or the story behind it, and they just like, okay, does this painting look good? Or sometimes this painting is by this famous artist, so even if it doesn't look good, it's expensive, so I'm going to buy it anyway. And you don't see the inner process of how it was created. But when you're doing it because you enjoy doing it, that thought process of, do I put this line here or there, do I put this note here, do I move my body this way, that thought process is actually what creates that sense of flow and enjoyment. And sometimes we might not see all the outtakes, right? I mean, you might like Samit, with the illustrations you share on Instagram and things, I think there might be versions before that that you threw it away because you didn't like what it or how it came out, and then you started again from the beginning, right? And so we don't see that rejection process because it didn't match what was in your imagination.
Yes, because thing is to come up at a final aspect, we have a long process. So we need 100 times we erase and we redraw. So as well as everybody have that aspect. Everyone try to do some new thing, a good thing. But what I want to say, uh, thing is the
So
art.
thanks, Will, for joining. Good night.
So what I feel is always if somebody comes to the art, even if it is in a kids, bestly is not only making them to a margin or frame and do these things inside this frame. I think it kills the creativity. So each and every time we need to give that totally freedom. Okay, whatever you do, keep it as it is, that's all. Then you can come up with a story why you do these things. So the final story has to be the lineup to each and steps what he tried to make. Then I think it's easy to we can create a story for those stories, and it's easy to make a story for him. It's people, once we see an art, everybody can give the stories, because when I draw an art, seen it in his experiences and what he's seen. The Christy see it, what her aspects and what are the experience from. But the artist who do it, he have another. Okay, why I did these things. So I think that's the best imagination that we can motivate the kids to create the stories, create the imaginations. And once we see the kids pictures, actually they are not nice. Because we say that those are not nice because it's from my mind. But once I get into his or her shoe, then that how he see the world. I think those arts are very natural. Those are not art. Sometimes when I draw a tree, I make it an artistic way because I know I it's kind of an inspirational tree what I draw, but it's not the kind of a natural. But once we kid, most of the time they draw, it's not an inspiration, but what how he see the world. Sometimes they draw elephants in blue because that's his free thoughts. I think always we need to motivate those free thoughts, otherwise they are also come to that frame. So art is a kind, I think art has a big philosophy always when once we come to the teach. That's what I was taught every time.
So based on that process you were describing, Samit, I have a question for you. And I think, so from the drawing side, you can answer this. And if Danny is still here, he could maybe answer from the music side, or maybe even Dilip or Christy. So now let's say I have something in my imagination that I want to draw. So one option is I can take paper and I can take chalk or crayon or pen or pencil, whatever it is, and I can draw it. And if it doesn't work, I throw it away and I start again and I keep doing that. Or I can use Illustrator or Photoshop for it, right? And similarly, if it's music, if I have something I'm trying to do, I could try to do this on the piano, on a keyboard. So I could actually play it and hear how it sounds. And then there's a very natural connection between what my hand is doing and what my body is perceiving. But I could also do it using a music composing software. I type the note in, I play it, I listen, then I change the note, I add a delay. So you could use a very use a technology aspect to it also. So I mean, one way of looking at it is, do whatever that works for you, or is there would you describe a benefit of one or the other ways?
So if I do it from the music perspective, Stefan, those are two different things, I think. Because even if you take music education, composing is different from playing the piano, right? So a pianist usually is not a composer. So someone who is even like if you take the piano playing, so the degrees are different for a solo pianist and an accompanist. So I think there are different views, but I have not seen that in the art stream where you give so much of importance for an interpretation. Because, for example, say now a pianist should be able to interpret the way Beethoven has written the piece. So a lot of people actually condemn, I mean, a critique on after going for a concert performance, they were critiqued whether the nuances of Beethoven's imagination of the piece is brought out in his playing, whether it was interpreted properly. And then there are other pianists also do a different modern interpretations of those pieces as well, but those are not usually accepted in the music um, arena. But composing, yeah, composing is completely different. So if you take a composing a century back, probably they would have played it on the piano and took the sounds from it. But if you also see that Beethoven was deaf and he composed when he composed most of the symphonies. So at that point, he did not use any computer softwares or even a piano or a musical instrument. So that came from his mind. But nowadays, yes, most of the people are using composing softwares. But same thing goes with the recordings also. So a live recording is completely different from engineered recording. So they do a lot of sound engineering and stuff. So I think in music perspective, composing, solo performance, and accompanying are three different things, even as a degree, as it's offered. But I'm not sure if that is the same in painting, whereas reciprocating someone else's painting. So, for example, Mona Lisa is not often seen as a good work of art, I think. I don't know. So, because I'm very new to the painting side, so I have less this thing from that. Yeah, that's my view.
Just a small thought. Uh, Once we do the arts also have several categories. If we come up with the portrait artist, they are more try to do the most natural things, because if they want to draw a portrait, they have to keep all the that measurements and all, they have to think about the measurements. So some of the ancient, the best are from the Picasso and the other kind of the Michelangelo, of those, they are try to keep that uh, those the corners and the third eye vision things for the what they draw. They try to keep that center points and the like a camera shots, what they the best shots. Likewise, they try to keep it. Those are very measurement, and it's another the mechanism and the aesthetic are mixed on that arts. So that's another level. I think it's the most highest level once you come up with the arts, if we say. Uh, but when you come up with the abstracts, the Picasso also have that abstracts. Abstracts doesn't mean about the engineer side, but abstract more about the concept. Abstract comes up with the more concept. It gives so many stories. If you see the abstract art gives so many stories, but it's not. It's a kind of not unrealistic. The people, once we see the human, they are not the realistic, but it's the story. Why? why Picasso used this eye here, why Picasso used the nose over here, why the 6 fingers, why the 5 fingers, why 2 fingers long. That's all about the story. So I think as the uh, what the Daniel also say, it's the art also have the engineer as well as the aesthetic also. It's more about the how people think, what is the outcome of this art. I think arts also have those kind of a play. Arts also have that vast area we want to play from the realistic and the aesthetic as well as the realistic and the conceptual things.
Any thoughts about drawing with hand versus using something like Illustrator and Photoshop?
It's uh, um, I think if you come up with the hand drawings are more unique, and it's sometimes what you draw one time, that's only. It's nobody can repeat it. Repeating it's the copying, but you can't repeat the same thing if you are. But if you come up with the Illustrator, you can repeat each and everything what you draw. But it's something ethically okay. I draw something like this, and I will not draw the same on Illustrator. But each and every time you can copy it and repeat it. But the Illustrator also is an method of the art in new generation, and it's very easy to do a productions. If you come up with the productions, the Illustrator is the major object that you have to go for the productions and all. It's something about the technical and aesthetic. Even you using the pencil or pen from the hand, even you using the cursor and mouse or the iPad or something from the technical, but the thoughts are the same. It's the final ending is going for the production, or it's just only an art. I want to keep it and something Sweeney or something. I think that's only about the thoughts. It's not about the using method, I think.
I think that uniqueness aspect is also kind of interesting because it's maybe also why we value sometimes a live performance more than a recording, because you know that the recording is going to be perfect. Because if there was something wrong, they would have redone the recording before mastering it. Whereas in a live performance, that artist has to have the skill to make sure not to mess up in that pressure situation with thousands of people watching. And so in a way, you hope the artist doesn't get stage fright or doesn't make a mistake, or that's some technical failure doesn't happen. But that possibility is there, that risk is there, and I think that adds to some sort of a thrill in participating in that you don't quite get when you listen to a recording. And I think there's a similar thing also between watching a live sports match or I think there's an aspect of watching it at the ground where there's the atmosphere and the fact that you could cheer, and you know that the noise can cheer your team on. And then there's the aspect of watching it at home on TV and it's live and you still cheer even though they can't hear you. And then watching a recording where you know what has happened, and you can still get, I think we derive different sorts of pleasure from each of those three things, but they are different, and we consume it for different reasons. So just, I mean, otherwise, why would you pay like 10,000, 20,000 rupees to go to a concert to listen to songs that even if you listen to it legally would cost you like a few hundred rupees, or if you downloaded it illegally would be free? It's because we're paying for some experience there. And I think that that's interesting from the angle of if it's hand drawn, it's a unique piece, and even if you drew it again, it would not be exactly the same thing. Christy, Dilip, anything you'd want to just chime in? I mean, you can build on something that has been said, or you can build on some other part of the original, or even bring in some aspect that we haven't touched on yet.
I kind of, Dilipa, do you want to say anything first?
I think you can go ahead, Christy.
Okay. One, that question was actually quite interesting. It's because when you ask like the difference between like using hand-drawn and using technology, of course, you know, for me, I'm a researcher, so the first thing I think of, how do we quantify it? So one thing that's interesting is that if you evaluate hand drawing, right, you can actually measure the child's proficiency in their gross and motor skills by how smooth the lines are, and especially like there's this term like their first imprints and their first like how they start writing. You can actually see the process of it, like from a child that's just started holding a pencil, go from holding a pencil to what their first lines and so on and so forth. And then if you compile it, you can actually see the differences of how it progresses. So that's one aspect of fine and gross motor skills. But if you bring in the aspect of using technology, why I find it interesting is because I did my thesis on pause analysis. So pause analysis and copying. So we had this program, and what the program did was we had children hold on to the Wacom tablet pen, like a stylus, and when they drew on the tablet, it's like those comic artist tablets. I think that's what it's called. And so we plugged that thing into the laptop, and when they drew it, the program will calculate how far is their movement as well as their pauses. And from that, it actually measures the cognitive processes of how slow and how fast they actually process what we gave them. So what my thesis is was I gave the children the 5 basic emotions: angry, sad, happy, and then disgust and fear. And what my finding was for the 3 basic emotions, which is happy, sad, and anger, the children, the pauses were very short. And we use that to interpret that their cognitive processes, they process that very easily. It means they're so used to it, they're so desensitized to it that they do it very fast with very, very small pauses. But for emotions such as fear and disgust, it took longer pauses. So we kind of explored on it why was those emotions, even though they're categorized as the 5 emotions, why was that 2 emotions, you know, took longer pauses, which would show that they are processing it longer in their head. And what we found was it's because the 3 basic emotions, which is angry, sad, and happy, is something that's very easily recognized. Every parent from every kindergarten would have exposed them to that. And the reason why they took longer time to process fear and disgust, because it was a mix of the 3 basic emotions. Means fear would have had some sadness and anger in it, and then probably disgust would have had another complex emotion. And this is just using the 5 emotions. So I like your question about using hand or tech, because the first thing that came out of my head was, I can measure that. So because, you know, it's just part of measuring the child's learning development, which is not like how, you know, public schools will rate them, but it's more of something that's internally that we can't really see.
I think it's also interesting that you mentioned the tablet because I mean, I was thinking more like a mouse or something like that, but I also have a writing pad. I had a Wacom tablet before. I have a writing pad, so I sometimes use it to write notes, and it's a bit similar to writing with the pen on paper, so it feels sometimes more natural than typing. And there are moments where I like to actually write with a pen, or especially a fountain pen, because there is some sort of feeling with the fountain pen that you don't get with the ballpoint pen, and you certainly don't get with typing. But typing is so convenient because if you want to fix something, you can just edit it so easily. But that the creative juices, so to speak, feel different when you're using your own body. I mean, even a pen is a technological aid, and then a tablet pen is mimicking that to a large degree. But then a mouse, where you're moving it in one place and the drawing is happening in another place, feels very different. And I don't know, maybe that has some bearing on the kind of art that we produce as well. Um,
I just have one small thing, Sifan. I would like to ask Samit also. So, I mean, when it comes to painting, okay, let alone drawing, now painting has a lot of impacts from these different mediums we use, acrylic or oil. And then even if it's oil, then whether we are going to put um, what type of medium that I'm going to use there will actually affect the drying time and how I manipulate the drawing. So, for example, if I put wet on, so I mean, I'll call the technical term wet on wet, or wet on dry paint or something like that. Can these be included in the digital painting as well? I mean, the drying time, because that is the natural process, right? So how you, I mean, why we go for acrylic colors than watercolors is because you can manipulate it for a longer time, and go for oil is because even for a longer time, it is wet. Right? So can this effect be felt on the digital technology as well?
Uh, I think the way I got the question, I will give an answer because if once you come up with the oil or watercolor or acrylic, it's the medium which we can easy to handle. The most hardest method is the oil. Oil have a very longer process. Once you come up with the oil paint, within even if you draw 1 or 2 days, and if even if you feel that I want to change it another next 2 3 days, yes, you can change it, because oil takes nearly 3 to 4 days to get a proper drying once you need. Uh, so as well as once you say that the the method of the computer arts and all, the people draw what they want, but suddenly if they change their mind, they can check again the colors and change and see what they want and what they won't have. But once you keep the same designer copy on one side, and keep the other one is next to them, and you can change the colors and you can compare it. But once you come up with that uh, the natural arts, I mean the oil, watercolor or something, just you can do only one change. You can't come to that back once you change it. So that's what I was feel what you asking. So that's I think people using digital art sometimes it's easy to undo and see what is in the future and what is you did in that. Uh, but when you come to the watercolor or the other colors, I think it's a bit difficult to play on that way. Uh,
um,
I
Samit, I think the question was a little bit more like, now, let's say if I have a paintbrush in Photoshop and I draw a stroke, it'll draw the paintbrush stroke, and I can adjust whether it's thicker or more opaque or things like that. But if I was doing this with some painting over something that was still wet, so if there was some yellow like this, and then I put a black, then that black will make the yellow smear and run, and something that would not happen on the plain paper. So I think Danny's question was whether that kind of effect can be simulated with a drawing tool.
yes, it not only that solid, but you have to play more. Then you can same as it is as a watercolor or oil paint. You can do it on Illustrator or some other electronic medium things, but it takes so much of time. But there are so many artists who do those things on Illustrator also, but it takes long time because you have to do it very simply little by little, and because you have to think how it is the merge, because once you draw a watercolor, you don't think how it merge. It naturally it merge, but you have to think that how these two colors merge on the electronic media, and you have to think it and you have to do it on electronic. So it's a bit hard, but can do.
So the
So
software to do it.
thing is, yeah. So
the-
my thing was like, so for education purpose, it's better to go the natural way than electronic. For a professional, then electronic is more adaptive. But for a child to start, probably the natural way is the best.
Yes,
Right.
yes, exactly. Because once you teach the arts, the fingertips are the most important thing. How they hold the pencil, how they hold the pen, how they hold the crayons, that's the most important thing. So I think the sensitive of those fingertips is more important. So when I learn, it's my personal experience. When I very first time when I was in 2006, when I learned the graphic design, we got a teach from a Korean teacher who come from the Korea to teach us. Within it was a 6 month course, but for the whole first month we couldn't go to the computer lab. We just use only the pens and pencils to draw the horizontal and vertical lines, curved lines on the papers. We did nearly 1 month, and all the students were pissed off. They think, okay, what is this? We came to learn Illustrator, but now we are doing the paper and pens work. What is this? And kind of their thoughts. But the Korean teacher doesn't say anything, but even he says we draw very small lines. Whole A4 sheets are completing from the lines and the circles from the pens and pencils. That's all. After 1 month finish, he gives the mouse, and he asked to do those lines in free hand. Then the people, the students realize how that horizontal and vertical lines were impact to draw the mouse and how to handle the mouse. I think the fine tune the motor skill, it's the natural thing. Even you draw something on a Illustrator or Photoshop or some other electronic media, the your hands and the wrist is the most important thing to work on. So I think the first thing is to be the natural, the pencil and pen, then has to come to the electronic.
I think that's from the perspective of maybe developing the motor skills and the control, and maybe unleashing the full aesthetic possibilities. But I think I don't know. I sort of feel there could be value in using like Illustrator and Photoshop and manipulations like that. But with it's also sort of dangerous that, I mean, nowadays I think people are getting used to typing so much that we forget about handwriting and the feeling that it can give. So if you get too stuck into using Photoshop and things like that for drawing and Illustrator and things, then you may not really get to explore what you could do with your hands. So I think finding how to get the benefits of both will be an interesting question. Any sort of closing thoughts from anybody before we try to wrap up for today?
I joined quite late to the conversation, this dialogue, so I don't know whether this was touched before or not. But I just I don't consider myself an accomplished artist of any sorts, but I'm a consumer of arts. I often wonder, because this topic is art education and why art sort of thing. So I mean, there are different ways of expressing yourself. There was a lot of discussion about drawing and arts and painting, to a certain degree music also. But whatever the aesthetic aspect it is, is there some, I often wonder about what would the world be if there wasn't art? Would that, I mean, just this whole idea of this whole brain person, and you need the right brain and the left brain and things, are they actually real? I mean, what does art do apart from producing an artifact, a piece of something? What does that do to the person? I mean, do we become better people? Do we become people who are able to tolerate and see that there can be different perspectives of things? Do we become somehow more open if we sort of reach out to our artistic self? That sort of thing. It's something that I think about. It's just exploratory thought. That's it.
Uh, well, sort of my thought on that, I think, is that art helps us to be more human, because it touches our feelings, because it makes use of our imagination. But let's see what Danny and Samit have to say.
Okay, so in my view, yes, I agree with Sifan, because I think arts started well before science and anything else. And in other words, like, so according to your slides, I saw in the first place where you mentioned um, geography and things and philosophy are also forms of art. And I think engineering and science are also a form of art to a certain extent, because if you don't have creativity, then you don't get anywhere as an engineer. You'll be just replicating someone else's work rather than uh, designing anything, right? So even Newton, in his own space, I think science is a philosophy, right? So physics is a philosophy, and there's no engineering without anthropology, for example. So anthropology is another work of art. We go back in terms and we try to analyze history as well. So I think art is, in my word, is almost like creativity. So, so without any creativeness, then we are not humans, right? But it doesn't mean that I mean to say that all the other animals are not creative. They have a creative on their own sphere, which probably we have not understood as yet. So that is my remark. So, but it has different forms to express, like different languages. So music is one way, art is one way, and then science is another way. I would see like that, but I think basically art is the only thing that is human about the whole thing. So the art is the basics of um, conveyance of a message or a feeling or whatever, I think.
Samit, anything to add?
Same as we discussed, if the art is the art, I'm always agreed not to keep a margin so marks on arts. I think it's make the creativity screwed. I think from the marks for the arts. Art means anything, any aesthetic, whatever, dancing, music, or the painting or whatever. Each and every student has to learn what is the art, and I think art is the people who can't talk, even they express their thoughts through arts. I have seen when I work with that kids on the cancer hospital, they do their they doing their so many, they are vibrant, they are the lovely thoughts are they expressing through the arts, even they know they're going to die on next day. So I think arts is kind of that thing, kind of an a philosophy for the each and every person who have distressed or distract, they are mentally on some certain level. Even people who can take a painting or something, take a paper and draw anything on it, I think reduce their stress level and all. That's a philosophical thing. So even if we go to the kids to teach something arts and all, I think the best thing is without a frame, keeping any kind of a frame, just give a freedom to use the paints and art and all. I think we can create a good humor. I think people for the next generation we need that humor. That's the thing reducing these days. People don't feel they are human, just only the numbers and all things compact their minds. So I think if we can put the arts on a scheme without putting any marks, and it's something to express their feelings, I think art can do much more things to the society. That's my final thought.
Okay, so just want to build on something Samit said before we close. It's interesting you said about working with children in the cancer hospital, right? So when people are ill or when people are dying or when people have trauma, then we use art for therapy. We don't give them science therapy, right? So and and when we're feeling in a when we're maybe not feeling so good and we want to have something to cheer us up, then we might listen to some music, we might dance, we might eat some tasty food or something like that. But we are pretty much unlikely to go and read a book on science or something like that to make us feel whole again. So I think there's that aspect of art that is definitely valuable. So thanks to everybody for participating. I'll share the recording on the FB event so you can access it later as well. And so the previous session, like my presentation was different then, and the conversations that happened then, and the thoughts since then, and some like I had some chats with Danny, a few other people also. So those have shaped where things are now, and then today's conversation will shape things again. So maybe in a few weeks or a month's time, we'll have another one to see how to take this forward. And I think it's going to be a bit of a ongoing thing as we try to figure out what kind of things we're going to do in art education for the schools. So thank you very much once again for joining. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sir.